Now maybe you've heard this story. I don't know. But they call it in Cornwall, Duffy and the Devil. Long time ago, in the old days, there was a squire in the village who needed a new housekeeper because his old housekeeper Jane had died. And before she died, her eyes grew so dim that she did not clean the house so well, and it was in a sad state of disrepair when the squire decided he needed a new housekeeper. That fall, at cider pressing time, his eyes settled on a fair young woman of strong build and a big smile, and he decided he liked the looks of her. "Are you needing a job?" said the squire as he paid her off at the end of the day. "I am indeed," said Duffy. "Well, can you spin and knit and clean and cook?" asked the squire. "Well, I make the best meat pies in the village," said Duffy. Just kind of missing the point of his question, I think, don't you? "But," she added quickly, "I won't muck out the barns and the pigsty." "Oh, no, I have a man for that," said the squire. But you come along tomorrow, then, for I need someone to take old Jane's place." Well, Duffy was very pleased with her whole bargain here, until she saw that house. What a mess! Dirt everywhere, cobwebs. It was terrible. And when she looked in the spinning room, she realized that there were bags and bags of wool. Nothing had been spun in a very long time. The dust on the spinning wheel was pretty darn thick. Squire followed her in. "Well," he said, "I guess there is quite a bit of work to do around here, but more than anything else, I want you to spin me some yarn and knit me some socks, for my feet are clear out of these. And your vest and your breeches don't look a lot better," thought Duffy to herself. "Well, you can get on with it now," said the squire. I go hunting usually during the day, and I'll be out most of the day." And off he went. Oh, Duffy stood there with her hands on her hips, surveying that house, disgusted. But Duffy was a cheerful sort, and she pretty soon said, "Well, guess I'll clean up for a bit, then I'll make some meat pies." Later that night, the squire returned, and he was hungry. And when he smelled those meat pies, he came in happy. And he ate quite a few of them, and then he said to Duffy, "Well, did you finish my socks?" "Tomorrow," she said. Well, he went out hunting the next day, and Duffy said to herself, looking at all those huge sacks of wool, waiting to be carded, waiting to be spun, then waited to be knit, and she groaned. Now, normally, she's a cheerful soul, and a good cook, but she really didn't like spinning much, and she really wasn't very good at it either. Yarn for the squire's clothes, blankets for the house. I could be spinning forever, she thought as she dusted off the spinning wheel and sat down in the kitchen. Why, the devil himself couldn't do all of this. "Oh, yes, I could," cried a shrill voice. And out from behind that wood pile in the hearth, or by the hearth in the kitchen, leaped a small, sharp-featured little man with a long tail. "Oh, Duffy, my dear, there is no need to work your fingers to the bone, carding and spinning and knitting. All of this can be done by just wishing for it." "Oh, can it?" said Duffy, suspiciously. "Yarn spun as fine and strong as metal, knit socks, vests that will never wear out," he said. "Blankets, breeches, all just for the wishing, Duffy." Twirling his tail, the little man grinned and waited for Duffy to consider his offer. There'll be a price to pay for it, no doubt." "Oh, Duffy, my dear, not a price, but a bargain between us. All the spinning and knitting you wish for 3 years, and at the end of that time, you just come away with me." "Ha! That's not much of a bargain," said Duffy. "Fair's fair. I was going to add, he went on, kind of grumpy, you must come away with me unless you can guess my name. I always keep my bargains. You have the honest word of a gentleman. Duffy knew very well that this gentleman, as he called himself, was none other than the devil. But as she watched him, confidently swinging his tail around, she thought, shoot, in 3 years' time, I could figure this guy's name out. Can't be that hard. Okay, agreed, said Duffy. And the little man swung his tail and grinned and disappeared. Now, Duffy was a sensible young woman, and she realized she didn't want to overdo it at first. So she didn't wish for everything. When the squire returned from hunting that night, he sat down to a fine meal. And when Duffy presented him with his fine new pair of yellow socks, he was delighted. Well, the months passed. The squire became more and more delighted. He thought this was the finest housekeeper any man had ever had, and he bragged about her. The yarn she produced was the finest. His new vests, his new breeches, everything were as strong as could be. And his socks, he loved his socks. He never tired of telling everybody in the village that Duffy produced the best socks he'd ever seen. Why, I've worn these socks for over a year, he said, and they're as good as new. Duffy's yarn is as strong as leather. Well, she might as well, keep him busy, and she did. That devil worked hard all that year and into the next. So hard that she had plenty of time to trot off to the grist mill, where she loved to chat and gossip with the other women in the village. And she had a merry time of it always, telling old tales, dancing around or two on the green grass behind the hill. It was a wonderful life. And it had to go somewhere, right? For one evening, when the squire came home from his hunting, he found Hughie, the widower, in the corner of the kitchen, who'd come a-courtin'. Squire wasn't too fond of that idea. He scowled and grumped round until Hughie took himself off, didn't want any part of this. But then, wasn't very long later, Jock, the miller's son, was sitting there in that chimney corner. What's he want? Growled the squire, right after Jock had left. Well, I suppose he's come a-courtin'. Wants to try my meat pies, said Duffy. Well, really, almost every evening there was somebody sitting there, and it did not take the squire long to realize that if he was going to have Duffy's services, he was going to have to make Duffy his wife. Duffy, he asked, how'd you like to be a squire's wife? I'd like that, she said. So they were married. Not much change. She had a little bit better clothes. But other than that, she was still Duffy. She still liked a good yammer down there at the mill. She still liked to dance, and she still made great clothing for that squire. And he always had wonderful food to eat, and the house was always clean. But the 3 years were running out. In fact, the sharp-faced little guy started showing up around the kitchen when Duffy was at work. He'd yell, "Ha ha! Only a month more, Duffy, my dear, and away you go with me." She'd just scowl at him. She tried everything she could to think of what that name could be, and she couldn't find a clue. He'd jump up, "Only 2 more weeks, Duffy. You'll never guess my name." She threw a pot at him, but he vanished, and the pot just smashed on the wall. She was getting desperate, so she went off to consult her friend Bet, who was one of her buddies from the mill. "Well, I know a thing or two about devils," said old Bet. "Let's see what we can do." But that night, there was that sharp-faced fella. "1 week to go, Duffy, my girl," he said. She took a swing at him again, but oops, he disappeared, and she just smacked the table hard as can be. Rubbing her sore knuckles, She hurried out into bed and she said, "We got to do something fast. He's going to drive me crazy, jeering at me every day. I'm so worried we're never going to learn his name." But that old Bet had a plan. She told Duffy to go down into the squire's cellar and get the biggest, finest jug of applejack she could find, and to bring it over to Bet's at sundown. Well, come sundown, the squire was still out hunting. Duffy just picked up the best jack she could find, and she carried it down to the green beside the mill. Bet was waiting for her. "Tonight's a full moon," said Bet. "The devils and witches are gathering to dance at the Devil's Basin out there on the moor. I thumped the tambourine for 'em, you know. You come along now, before they arrive." She wrapped herself in her old red cloak and picked up the jug and the tambourine and hurried off with Duffy just right behind her. When they arrived at Devil's Basin, Bet told Duffy that she should hide herself in some furze bushes and not be seen. She'd watch. Whatever she did, she wasn't to make a sound. Duffy promised, hid herself down in the scratchy furze bushes with just the tiniest little peephole to see through. Got a little darker. Pretty soon she could hear chattering, little singing, merry voices coming up over the hill toward the basin. Through her peephole she could see they'd lit a fire. Now it burned high with a blue flame. Bet was right by the fire, with her tambourine in hand and with the applejack jug right down in front of her. Round and around that fire those dancers danced, including the little devil with his long tail. But every time he came round old Bet, he took a swig out of that jug. He went dancing around that fire, and he took a swig. He went dancing around that fire, and he took another swig, until he was merry as can be, and more than a little bit tipsy. When he got so he couldn't really stand too well anymore, he started swaying back and forth. He jumped up and down a little bit, twirled his tail, and said, "Duffy, my lady, you'll never guess that my name is Terry-Top, Terry-Top, Terry-Top. Duffy, my lady, you'll never guess that my name is Terry-Top, Terry-Top, Terry-Top." At that exact moment, some hounds, hunting hounds, could be heard, and pretty soon seen coming over the hill, right across the moor in the moonlight. Yeah, it was the squire, and he was chasing a hare right toward Devil's Basin. Well, dancers disappeared in just a second, and the tambourine stopped, and there was nothing left by the time he got there but just an applejack. Well, of course, Duffy scrambled out as fast as she could, ran home, and she barely had time to sit down in the corner and act like she'd just been there all night, when in comes the squire. "Oh, what a bad time of it I had today," he said. "Couldn't raise a hair till almost after sunset. And then, Duffy, you wouldn't believe this, but we were chasing this hare all over the moor by the moonlight, and then I came up over, and there at Devil's Basin there were a bunch of witches dancing, and I scared 'em off. What do you think of that, Duffy?" She shook her head. "It's bad luck, you know, to break in on witches dancing. What'd they do?" "Well, just up and disappeared. I just saw that jug lying there, and then I knew I better get home, 'cause if I got too close, no doubt I would have been cursed. I mean, I never did get the hare." Well, the 3 years of Duffy's bargain were up, and on the day the sharp-faced little devil showed up in Duffy's kitchen with a big grin on his face. "Time's up, Duffy, my dear," he said, smirking, flicking his tail around a little bit. "I've got my part of the bargain. You have to come off with me now." "Not so fast. There was more to the bargain than that." "You think you can guess my name? I'll give you 3 guesses." "Well, maybe it's Lucifer," guessed Duffy. He laughed. He thumped his tail. "I know him," he said, "but it's not my name." "Well, Maybe it's Beelzebub. Actually, a cousin of mine, lowlife. No, not my name. Oh, come along, Duffy, you'll never guess my name. It's not generally known here on Earth. And he was about to lay hands on her when Duffy dodged out of his way and said, no, you don't. You're honest enough to admit that your name is Terry Top? He just stared at her, glared at her in anger. Do you deny your name is Terry Top? A gentleman never denies his name. But I didn't think I'd be beat by the likes of you. And with a puff of smoke, he was gone. Just a second later, everything in the whole house that the devil had spun for Duffy dissolved, turned to dust. Of course, now, you can probably guess the squire was off on some hill hunting with his hares, and it was a cold night. First thing that went, his socks dropped off, and then his breeches, and then everything that was homespun, till all he was left in were some leather shoes and jerkins, and it was blue bum cold out there. He came home shivering like a leaf. Duffy, see what's happened to me? Must be the witch's curse on me for breaking up their dance. Bring me some stockings and breeches quickly. Duffy just shook her head sadly. All the yarn goods in the whole house, they must be cursed as well, dear, for they've all turned to dust. He realized this was true. He groaned. But you can spin me some more, can't you, Duffy? She shook her head. I don't see how. Seems to me like everything here must be cursed, don't you think? We'd best have the work done elsewhere. The squire wasn't at all pleased with this idea, till Duffy pointed out to him, quite sensibly, look, you wouldn't want all your clothes to drop off out somewhere on the moors in the dead of winter, or all the blankets on our bed to just turn to dust in the middle of a cold winter's night, would you? Well, that is enough. It convinced him. I'd be the laughingstock of the county, he said, if I was be happening to me out on the moor. If I didn't freeze to death first. So they set out for their knitting and stuff like that, and Duffy was pretty content with that bargain, and the squire hunted happily ever after.